Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the National Press Club and to our event on online security for journalists. My name is John Donnelly. I'm a reporter with Congressional Quarterly, and I'm a member of the National Press Club board, and I chair the National Press Club Press Freedom Committee. The Press Freedom Committee is the arm of the National Press Club that responds to threats to press freedom and open government in the U.S. and abroad. The committee leads the press club efforts to speak out where we think our voice can be helpful. We write letters, issue statements, sign on to friend of the court briefs, and hold forums like this. Individual reporters don't lobby the Congress, but the National Press Club as an organization does lobby on very rare occasions, supporting, for example, a national shield law to protect journalists from being forced by governments to disclose confidential sources. Tonight's issue is related to the issue of anonymous sources, but it goes beyond that. Our aim tonight is to show American reporters the nature of the threat to their digital security. We're not talking about cybersecurity writ large or the constitutionality of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act or the Patriot Act, though those are related and important subjects. We're talking about reporters and their sources, meaning, number one, what reporters need to worry about, primarily here at home, and number two, what they can do about it without going too far into the technical weeds, but giving you some ideas and some resources. The issue is important because, first, journalists want to keep their professional data, like their personal data, from prying eyes for its own sake. But there's a broader issue here that goes to the heart of our trade and our democracy. If reporters' anonymous sources don't know they'll be protected when they talk to the press, the flow of information about wrongdoing could slow, and that's bad for everybody except the wrongdoers. Before I introduce our panel, I want to tell you that we're going to, after our panel discussion, have about a half an hour of questions. And when that time comes, I implore you to really ask questions instead of make statements. And please keep it brief. And right now, if you can turn off any cell phones or other noise-making devices, that would be wonderful. And I would like to let you know that the event is being webcast, and it's going to be available for viewing later, both at press.org, our website. If you're tweeting this event, I'd like to suggest that you use either or both of these hashtags, Press Freedom, one word, or Press Club DC. And if you're interested in joining the National Press Club, you can find out more at our website, press.org, or you can email members@press.org. Now to our panel. I'm going to move down this way, starting with Jonathan Hutcheson, a public interest lawyer and journalist who designed and implemented a source security platform for Whistleblower Alley, which is a secure online place for sources around the world to provide information about corruption. Whistleblower Alley is hosted by 100 Reporters, an organization that connects investigative journalists with citizens around the world to expose wrongdoing. Moving down the table, Joe Hall, senior staff technologist at the Center for Democracy and Technology, who focuses on policy mechanisms for encouraging trustworthiness and transparency in information systems. And our last panelist is Matthew Cole, a former producer for ABC News and an investigative journalist who has experienced government surveillance as a result of his reporting activities. And I'd like to start the conversation with a question to Matthew Cole. Yesterday, a former CIA counterterrorism operative named John Kiriakou pleaded guilty to disclosing the name of a CIA interrogator to a reporter, and that reporter was identified in court documents as Matthew Cole, according to news reports. The documents showed emails from Kiriakou to Matthew. And I understand that there are limits to what you can say prior to the sentencing in this case, but I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit of what we need to know about the threat and about what reporters need to know, primarily about who is the threat coming from? What do we need to worry about?
Okay. Well, the first thing is just one small correction. I was not identified in any court documents. It's been in the news that Journalist A is me, and I'm limited in what I can say, but just for some correction.
Thank you.
There's good news and there's bad news. So I'll give you the bad news first. The bad news is that everything that we do in our life today, regardless of whether we're journalists, leaves a digital trail. And the capability of the government, which is by and large who the adversary is from the perspective of who wants to look at it at some point, is endless. Okay, that's the bad news. The good news is that most of the time that's not likely to happen. I think the thing that's really important, and if I could urge you, there was an op-ed last year in the New York Times written by Chris Sergoian, who's a privacy expert. And I think it's ironic that it took someone who was outside of the industry to do this, but he implored journalists have a moral and ethical obligation to their sources to protect them. And I think that's the key thing to remember here, is that as you go forward, there are a lot of legal limits in place to protect journalists and their communications, but there are virtually none for the people who are going to talk to you or would talk to you. And so as we get into some of the things that should or should not be done, I think the framework to keep in mind is that journalists, human rights researchers, whoever it is, there is a moral and an ethical and certainly professional obligation to protect people who are effectively breaking the law to share information.
Okay. Well, how do prosecutors find out a reporter's identity? Do they go and snoop the emails of the government officials, or do they snoop the emails of the reporters, or both?
No, they start first with a leak. So you have something that's in the press, and there is a referral. If they have reason to zero in on someone, they are looking first and foremost at government employees who had reason to know the information, and then the possibility that they leaked it. A journalist's communications are you can subpoena them. The Justice Department can subpoena them, but to do so requires the signature of the Attorney General. So it's an extremely high bar. There are some gray areas where instead of subpoenaing the actual communications, your emails from back and forth or your phone calls back and forth, there is some wiggle room. It's not clear how much has been used. My best sense is that the government has been very wary to do it, but using the ability to see who a potential suspect or source has communicated with just by looking at IP addresses. So, i.e., they don't know what you said in your email. They just have an idea that you emailed someone, and from there they identify journalists or people in the media that they may be talking to, and that's an area where they may not need a signature from the Attorney General.
Okay. So they could look at the communications by the government official and see who, including reporters, he or she was talking
right.
to. Okay. So you've got a case of a leak of classified information and a subpoena of a reporter as a possibility. You could subpoena the reporter's documents, but you could also try to compel the reporter to testify, right? That's what's happened in the case of James Risen in the New York Times. They're trying to get him to testify against himself. So let's talk about some of the other scenarios, some of the other ways in which either our government or other governments or criminals, let's go through some of the other possible, adversaries, if you like, or threats. Anybody?
So the way that technologists think about this problem is you think about, and people who have heard me or someone speak about this before, it's going to sound very rote. You think about the threat model. So you want to think about what are you trying to protect? Who are you trying to protect it from, and what are their capabilities? And I think Matthew is right. If your adversary is a powerful government, it's going to be very hard to keep things completely concealed from that kind of an adversary. Organized crime, still pretty difficult. They have quite a few resources to bring to bear. If it's sort of coworkers or casual snooping, that's the stuff that's very, very easy to protect against. I'll stop there, I suppose.
Oh. Well, if you also think about it, like coming more from the journalist side, probably 90% of reporters out there don't really have to worry about this too much. I mean, if you're covering sports, it's not really a concern. Unless you're covering Lance Armstrong, that might be a different matter. But by and large, a lot of subject matter areas aren't sort of ripe for this concern. But if you're dealing with defense issues, national security, intelligence, massive corporations where the subject matter at issue is whistleblower in nature, or will lead to a controversy of sorts that may have financial ramifications, intellectual property ramifications. I mean, there's all sorts of scenarios that you can think of where there's so much at risk that the resources that would be brought to bear are pennies compared to what the fallout could be. So, that gives a lot of organizations that have those resources reason to make use of them. You have several years ago HP going after boardroom leaks, and that actually popped back up in the news recently because it's still sort of in the court. But that's an instance where, similar to what Matthew was talking about, it wasn't as much about looking at what was communicated as who was communicated with, and they got into phone logs by hiring private investigators to see who board members had made contact with certain journalists and that sort of thing. So, HP, I mean, some of you probably have a printer by them, but that's an organization that was an adversary towards journalists in that instance.
I mentioned the SHIELD law or SHIELD bill. There are SHIELD laws in states, and National Press Club and others are looking for a national SHIELD law, which would bar the government from forcing reporters to disclose anonymous sources. There was an interesting quote. Lucy Dalglish, who was head of the Reporters Committee, she's now dean at University of Maryland, was quoted an anonymous intelligence agency official saying, "You all are worried about," something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, "You all are worried about the SHIELD law, but we don't have to we don't have to go to you anymore. We know who you're talking to." So that gets back. Doesn't that get back to what we touched on there, which is that the real sort of vulnerable point in the chain is the source, particularly in government, defense, and security agencies, insofar as they are sworn to secrecy and their communications, the government's allowed to tap into their communications, and so the concern for reporters is going to be making sure, is really on that end. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right, but there should be some clarification. We can use the Sterling and the Jeffrey Sterling case as an example. Because leak investigations happen after something ultimately has been made public, what is occurring is an investigation after the fact. And so, there is always the potential for the government to, through counterintelligence or counter-espionage investigations, to monitor its own, because they believe that a crime is going on. I think that from a journalist standpoint, that risk is pretty minimal. What you're really talking about is covering your tracks, or what tracks you leave, so that later, 3 years later, the government, when they go to do an investigation, finds less and less. And when they do have infinite resources, but there are basic things that can be done. I think the biggest thing is remembering, if your sources aren't thinking of it for themselves, is helping them think of it, and instituting what are basically good, best practice security measures. I say security measures, but it's really just about how you make contact, what kind of communications you make with people, and what transpires, so that you have an idea. It's impossible. I think it's safe to say it's impossible to be perfect. And so if you think of it from the standpoint of leaving, all of us, every one of these phones is a tracking device. And iPhones are particularly bad because you can't even remove the battery. So, if you are, one of the things that I do is I use, if anyone here is a fan of The Wire, I use burners, right? Yeah. You buy cell phones that are cash only, but you have to make sure you cannot use them anywhere near your real phone, and you can't use them in your home or in your office, because they are a GPS locator. And so there are things that you can do to mitigate some of the risk, but you don't have to get too paranoid, because it's also impossible, right? You're going to make mistakes. The largest thing is trying to limit what your sources leave behind that can be grabbed by the government, because they've signed away all privacy issues. I mean, rights. When you sign a non-disclosure agreement and you go to work for the government, you don't have the same privacy rights that the rest of us have. So that's important in terms of framework of thinking about who it is that you're trying to protect and what it is that you're trying to protect.
Mm-hmm. Anybody want to add?
Yeah,
anything?
sure. I think there's some really basic things that you can do in general, not just as reporters, but to sort of clean up your own digital hygiene, so to speak. Password managers, I know 3 passwords, but I have something like 700, and they're all 15 to 20 characters long, completely random, but I only remember 3, and one of those opens my password manager, which is very strongly encrypted. Things like Password Wallet, which is a great product for that kind of stuff. You should never have a password that has words in it. It's just not a good idea at all. You shouldn't be able to remember, most of your passwords. They should be really hard. Firewalls and virus scanners, even on a Mac, you should have these things. And be paranoid about things like unexpected links, files that show up. You might want to question where they came from before you do anything with them. And something that people don't realize is secure deletion. Like on the Mac, for example, and this exists on Windows and other systems too, when you delete something, it doesn't remove the stuff. It just removes the fact that your operating system knows it's there. And if you hit on the Mac and the Finder, secure empty trash, it actually goes over and rewrites those bits. And that's a way of sort of hiding your stuff. But that's really about you and not really about what's happening in transit when you're, when something's in the communications pipeline. There you want to make sure that things are encrypted, but still, like, I think, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Jonathan raised a minute ago, there's sort of a notion of traffic analysis. Even if you're sending out encrypted stuff that they could never break, they may be able to know it's you just from where it's coming from. And so there are tools like the Tor browser, which you should Google and you should have on your systems, makes it to where it's very hard to break into your communications and very hard to tell where you're coming from. Anyway.
Well, to touch on that a little bit, the password manager is somewhat counterintuitive, because it's like, oh, all my passwords are in one place. If someone gets that password, then they know everything, which is why you pick a really good password for that. One thing that helps protect against is keyloggers, which are, kind of the down and dirty tools that anyone can really find if they know how to use Google and put on their, supposed cheating spouse's computer, coworker. It's pretty low tech. It's been around forever, and it literally logs just all the keystrokes. So from that, people can, derive passwords and that sort of thing. So by simply copying and pasting passwords from a password manager, you kind of protect yourself from that as well. So if you're on like an unfamiliar computer or something like that, or abroad, that's a good way of kind of protecting yourself against that thing. But the real emphasis that I think we're going to talk more about is the focus on the source. Because while journalists can do a lot to protect themselves if they're willing to put in the effort and time, sources are a little unpredictable. Who knows what their background is? Who knows what their technical sophistication is? Do they just use a computer for word processing and they don't really think too much about what might be exposed? They send that email from their work computer with like all those crazy confidential documents, and it's like, well, maybe they're unaware that they don't really have privacy at the workplace, and that companies can monitor pretty much any equipment that they own. Those are the sorts of things that are important to educate sources about when you're dealing with any of these sensitive circumstances. And the ultimate question is, how do you educate a source before they're your source? That first point of contact may be kind of the thread that unravels the whole thing later in a backward-looking sort of analysis, down the road. And it's how do you secure that first point of contact? And that's one of the things that we focused on with.
Yeah. if their first point of contact with you is an email with an attachment, and they say, take a look at this, and if you want to talk more, contact me, the game's already over, right? If they do it from work.
Yeah.
Okay, we mentioned like password wallets and secure deletion and the Tor browser. I want to ask, is there any of this stuff that you guys would single out as, no kidding, everybody should be doing this? And the second part of my question is there anything that sources of these technical responses that sources in particular need to keep in mind, or that journalists in particular need to keep in mind, or is basically the same technical advice applicable to everybody?
I mean, there's a very simple one, which is don't put it in writing.
Yeah.
Do not put it in writing. If you put it in writing, expect it to show up on the New York Times 4 years later. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb for anything. But email, text, anything where you're expressing yourself in words, because as you go down the line, yes, they can see that you made a phone call, but they don't know what you said, because again, they're not monitoring you real time. So you've already given them something where they have circumstantial evidence, but they don't have the contents of what was expressed. So I think that the simplest rule is do not put it in writing, ever, in any way whatsoever. I go as far as to, after I've worked out that sort of initial issue of approaching a source, and if they say yes, I often create a conspiracy. What I have is I send an email that may say, I'd like to talk to you, and I have them send back an email that says, in effect, go, take a walk. I don't want to talk to you. To leave some kind of, it's, I mean, much of it is for peace of mind, but that's the record. The only record is actually that this person told me that they weren't going to talk. That really should be your first priority in thinking about how to protect your sources. And there are, there are many stages and levels you can keep going through. But
yeah, other than the ones we've mentioned, I'll mention if you're using a web browser, you should use something like HTTPS Everywhere. It's a plugin that makes sure that places that offer encrypted connections that you use that encrypted connection and don't do things on accident. But VPNs, a virtual private network. If you're ever connecting from an open Wi-Fi, anytime you're ever at a conference, and it's a what's called a captive portal, where it grabs your browser and says, please agree to this long thing you don't read. VPNs are just critical for this kind of stuff. And like for example, Astrill, ASTRILL, allows you to basically look like you're coming from anywhere in the world with a very highly encrypted connection, and all your traffic coming out of your computer will be encrypted. And that's, so I would say, other than things we've mentioned, making sure you have the little lock on in your browser when you're doing stuff, and then using VPNs for general net communication, those are pretty much no-brainers.
I would add on to that encryption. If you are going to do any sort of digital communication, and you're not going to be meeting in parking garages and the like, encrypt everything, because if it's in transit and it's plain text, it's readable by someone, if anyone's packet sniffing and that sort of thing. If it's coming out from a network of a corporation or a government, chances are they're looking at all that stuff, especially if it's coming from the email account of said organization. Encrypting data itself, there's a great program called TrueCrypt. If you don't know what it is, look it up. That is a solution to a lot of issues, some that we'll talk on a little bit later in terms of kind of crossing borders and that sort of thing. You really, if you think about it like a car, Jay-Z sung about this in terms of getting pulled over and having your car searched and that sort of thing. Legally, if your glove box is locked, they need a warrant to search that. Similarly, if you have stuff all over your computer, notes from meetings with sources, whatever, source documents, it's just laying out there in the open digitally. So having like an encrypted volume like TrueCrypt can give you, which allows for basically something that loads up like a USB stick as far as how you interact with it. You can put your documents in there, whatever. When it's open, you can work with it after decrypting it, and then when you close it out, it's encrypted and pretty safe as long as you don't pick a stupid password. Which again, passwords, that's one of the weakest links in the entire thing because, you think Kitty123 might be a good idea. You won't forget that, but it's not a good idea.
You just picked that at random, right? That's not actually your password.
I might have to step out for a moment. I don't bank with Bank of America, in case anyone's wondering. But no, seriously, passwords are very important. You can go the real hardcore approach, random 15, 20, 900-digit, character passwords. But there's kind of a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And there is another school of thought that suggests multiple small words, either together or hyphenated, is relatively secure as well. So you can come up with secure, memorable passwords that won't necessarily be susceptible to like a brute force dictionary attack or rainbow tables or whatever the kids are using these days.
You ought to have at least one symbol, right, and mixture of words and numbers. Is that still good advice?
If you're doing the mix, uppercase, lowercase, number, symbol, a lot of places are being more proactive on that and forcing you to use good passwords, especially banks and that sort of thing. So, for some of us out there that have been resistant, you've been forced into good passwords. But the other main thing to be cognizant of is firewalling. Not in the sense of a computer firewall, but you should not have the same password for everything. And if you are that kind of person, for the stuff that's really important, and let's say you're a journalist, but like you're kind of like, I don't really care about my personal stuff. For the journalist stuff, anything with sources, you should have unique passwords. Your email account, you should care about that just as much as you care about your car keys or your house keys or whatever. That's not something to be careless about. And from there, as some people have found, I forgot the guy's name, but whoever got his account hacked and then just kind of went. Yes, he learned a hard lesson about how if someone can get your email, they can often use that to I forgot my password here, there, everywhere, and then reset them all from that starting point. So your email account can really cause the security to unravel, even if you have good security practices elsewhere, because I forgot my password, and suddenly your life can fall apart if you're not the one clicking that button.
In that case, like for something like Gmail, you should enable something called two-factor authentication, which once a month requires you to enter in some random value that your phone barfs out. And it's just to make sure that they know that something they know you have access to that's sort of like you, your phone, is actually there next to you when you enter in your password.
If you're dealing with anything sensitive and you have two-factor authentication as an option, it's a pain as far as hassle goes, but it's one of the arguably best practical protection methods out there. Although, as with all things, there are weaknesses. But
Now, all the things you're touching on is good advice for reporters and for sources too, right? Is there anything in particular that sources message you would send to them if they're watching?
Well, encryption, as far as email goes, is a two-way street. For it to be effective, both sides really need to use it. PGP or GPG is kind of the way to go, largely for that. It does get around the first contact problem with public keys. You can have your public key available out there. I have mine out there. A lot of people that use this do. There's global directories, if you will. You can search by email. A lot of applications actually will do that automatically. If you type in an email, it'll see if one's available. And that allows for you to encrypt a message to them without them, having ever met you before. So even though you're not expecting it, they can still communicate with you that first time securely. I don't know if when we're gonna get into tips or whatever, but there's
Well,
like
I think we're already there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if you have a Mac, GPG Tools, I suggest. It's a real quick way to download a one-stop shop of getting going with that. GPG for Win is the companion for PCs. And it's probably the simplest way to get into encrypting your email that you can find. And once again, use a good password and probably use a password you don't use with something else. I'm kind of split on how I feel about expiring keys, what the value proposition is there. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but
No, that's probably a little advanced. Maybe.
yeah.
I teach students how to do things securely, or I have in the past, and I can imagine it's extremely hard to teach someone who, by just coming to you for advice, is exposing themselves, fundamentally. So it's great that this is going to be available, and we should mention some resources. For example, the Committee for Protection of Journalists has a security guide written by Smith and Danny O'Brien, and you go to cpj.org, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And so you may not have understood some of the stuff we talk about in terms of encryption. For example, it's really important to know about, if you're going to do something, hard encryption tools. So this thing that Jonathan mentioned, GPG or PGP, the Pretty Good Privacy or GNU Privacy Guard, that's the kind of thing that should be your first. I think if you really want to sort of dive into this, you should look at those resources. What happens there, the way I like to explain this to students is, you can imagine having a box with a lock on it that you and your source have a key to. The problem is how do you exchange that key? It becomes really hard to do that without being associated with one another. And there's this thing that we mentioned in passing, we didn't explain very well, called public key crypto, which is what the PGP, GPG stuff does. The idea there is, say the box has two locks. One opens it and one closes it, and all you need is to have the one that closes it for who you're communicating with. So you put your little note in this box, you use their public key, which you can go get on their website, to close it, and then send it to them, and then no one can open it if they don't have the private key that opens the box. And so it's kind of a strained metaphor. It's a box with two keys, one for opening, one for closing. But that's really what happens. And the cool thing about it is these are highly secure. In fact, these are the things you can use to defeat even determined adversaries like really, really big governments. And although apparently NSA is snarfing up all ciphertext, all cryptographic traffic, and putting it somewhere in Utah for later. So there may be a day in which, but hopefully, yeah. Well, hopefully it's past any statute of limitations or something like that. Yeah, in fact, we really should, and I think the NDI folks are interested in doing that at some point. And so there's this movement called Crypto Party where people like me and Jonathan and others who know how to use these tools and teach you how to use them and show you how they're useful, do hands-on kind of like tutorials. There was a DC one recently, and I think the New America Foundation OTI folks in the room, and the NDI folks are interested in doing specific ones, and one for journalists. And so I'm not sure how to tell you to keep an eye open for that, but my Twitter feed is @Joby1, and the CDT will put, the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT.org, will definitely publicize that if you want hands-on experience with that. I certainly don't know how to write a guide for whistleblowers, so I hope they're watching.
Well, a flip side of that, while we talk about highly technical sorts of ways that you can employ, one of the things that I alluded to was, sometimes you're dealing with sources that are maybe not sophisticated on the tech side. Maybe they don't have, a modern computer to use, especially if you're dealing with sources abroad. And how can you work with them in a way that's easy to kind of set up and arrange and regularly use? Because all of this stuff is relatively useless if it's not regularly employed. I mean, if you use it at the start and then you drift away from it, or you don't use it one time, that kind of undermines the entire process. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Privacy Box, which is based in Germany, and that's a key component that we ended up going with for 100 Reporters. That is very simple and straightforward and handles a lot of the heavy lifting through simply a browser connection. So you don't need software on your computer, so that also means that people can go to internet cafes or whatever and just jump on there and communicate securely. And the messages are kept within the system. So you don't have like traffic, traveling where it can get sniffed, wherever in the world it might go. It's all kind of staying on the same system. It's free. It was actually set up by the German Privacy Foundation, in particular for journalists and whistleblowers and that sort of thing. You can make a strong argument that it falls under German privacy laws, which are some of the strongest in the world, and they log no information whatsoever on connections. So it's a great tool to use in a pinch. And then there's also Hushmail, which kind of puts a friendly face on encryption and secure email. They do charge you money or make you check it religiously if you want a free account. But that's a good tool to use if you want a throwaway account or something like that. And then there's also that kind of hacky approach of having a dummy Gmail account or something like that, and you log into it and you exchange messages through the drafts folder. If you want to feel a little James Bond on that. That is a legitimate approach, although you're dealing with login credentials with 2 or more individuals, and if they log in from the wrong place or not securely, then that kind of falls on its face. But in a pinch, it is something readily accessible, and I think a lot of people can generally work their way around webmail systems these days. So.
Okay. There have been some kind of disturbing reports recently about things happening at the border. The ACLU says that thousands of Americans have been subject to electronic device searches by Customs and Border Patrol agents. And a documentary filmmaker, I may be mispronouncing her name, Laura Poitras, Poitras, says that dozens of times she's been detained, interrogated, her data, her devices taken away, and they have evidence that they didn't just take the device, they also looked at what was on it and apparently copied it, all without a warrant or any kind of allegation against her. So my question is, assuming this is all true, and I have no reason to doubt it, is there any technical advice that you would add? Because it seems like most of what we're talking about so far has been about emails and online presence. Do you have any advice for reporters, American reporters, let's say, who are traveling abroad, coming back to this country, who might need to worry about that?
Sure, but Matthew, we haven't let you talk enough.
It's okay. In that case, I mean, the way it's been, just as a background, one of the things that I do, because I deal with people who are inside the intelligence community and who, years ago I considered to be way too paranoid for their own health, and I've come around to realizing that they're very, very paranoid for very, very good reasons, and very good for their health to be that paranoid. And what I have them do is I have them teach me what it is that they want me to do, and so each source often has I have a different system with, and it's whatever system they're comfortable with. And one of my sources was very keen on teaching me slowly, because I'm not very bright on this stuff, but I try to pretend that to have essentially two systems, one that I work with at home that has encryption and all of that, and then another one that's much cheaper and throwaway that I take abroad. Now I have reported abroad, and I've gone to some tough countries, but in those particular circumstances there wasn't anything in particular that I was concerned about. Nonetheless, everything I have is encrypted, and if I can, I don't have anything on it to bring back. I've put it somewhere else or gotten rid of it altogether, so there's really nothing for them to take. And so you guys could tell me more, but my experience and from what I've seen is that encryption, because they can't hold you forever, and it does take, even if they have the capability to crack the encryption, it takes a really long time that they don't have. So you just want to make sure that you put roadblocks in front of them for the methodologies that they use to take to snoop, essentially.
Yeah, I'd say 3 things. Disk encryption, so products like TrueCrypt, there's a few others that will encrypt your entire drive on your computer, and use as beefy of settings as you can, because you want it to take forever for them to be able to crack through it, and choose a good passphrase or password for that stuff. Similarly, like your iPhone, if you don't have a PIN, that's bad. But if you do have a PIN, I'd suggest using a more than 4-digit numerical PIN, because the cool thing is, if like I have a 9-digit numerical PIN, which may sound really ridiculous and paranoid, but the cool thing is that when I have to enter it, it gives me the phone number interface, so it's really easy to do really quick. But with a 4-digit PIN, they can crack into it in like 3 minutes, I believe, or something like that. With a little device they stick in the bottom, they can totally get into your stuff. And the other piece of advice I'd say, even with disk encryption on your laptop or something like that, there are very clever ways if you leave it in sleep mode. So if you just close the top of it and don't actually shut it down, there are clever ways that they can open it really quick, rip the RAM out, and freeze it, and get your key. And so I would suggest shutting it down, make sure it's before you're going to the customs people if you fear this stuff. And the last thing is if you have to do things like, there's a story that I can't remember the entire details about, where a guy was filming in Syria and guaranteed his sources that he would blur their faces, but then tried to get out of the country without doing that operation, because it takes a long time to do that kind of stuff. And his stuff was seized, and various people, a couple people just disappeared. If you're going to make promises like that, you really need to have that sort of sensitive stuff only sensitive for a minimal amount of time, and then securely delete that stuff. Just make sure you're overriding it. It may take a while to do that, but especially with video, or destroy it. I mean, there's a variety of really fun ways to jump on top of computers, dip them in acetone, light them on fire, destroy them with hammers and stuff like that. That's you can have sort of the opposite of a crypto party, where it's a crypto apocalypse or something like that.
Just a couple of additional points. Doing entire disk encryption is a red flag if anyone's suspicious. So sometimes it pays off more to just have a section encrypted, because that doesn't necessarily trigger any bells and whistles for just, if they open it up and it's like, oh, you need a password to turn it on, and then suddenly it becomes a thing. But if it turns on, but all your sensitive material is kind of tucked away, that may help you in the long run. TrueCrypt has a great feature called plausible deniability, which allows for you to provide a special password that doesn't really open things up in a way that allows access to your sensitive stuff, and it's kind of like a decoy, if you will. So it gives people at the border that satisfaction of a job well done without finding anything. But depending on what you're dealing with, it's a good idea to get what you need to get out securely before traveling. Because let's say you don't necessarily have your stuff like compromised at the checkpoint, it's just confiscated. Then they've got however long they want to go at that stuff. You don't have the stuff when you go wherever you're going to file or work with the material. And at some point down the line, your source may disappear, which I think is awkward for everyone, especially the source. And I say that kind of humorously, but that underlines the overall premise here that it shouldn't be lost, and that is, on our side, it may be losing a story, but on the source's side, it may be losing their job, it may be losing their freedom, or maybe losing something even more precious than that. And that's why it's not just an ethical imperative, it's a moral imperative to maintain these sorts of techniques and practices on our end, because they're depending on you. I mean, however you ended up meeting with the source, they put their trust in you to look out for them, and you can't be slipshod on how you take care of your equipment. I have another humorous anecdote. I was over in the tunnels of Capitol not too long ago, and there was a propaganda-style poster lurking down there.
What does it say? Because they probably can't see it.
Protect, don't neglect your privacy. Traveling overseas, have your BlackBerry scanned by InfoSec. Protect the house network. So when you're dealing with smartphones and stuff like that, going abroad, don't. Get yourself a burner or a travel phone or something like that. If you're going to a country that is known for being suspect in these issues, everyone points to China for good reason. because there are a lot of anecdotes about stuff happening, not just with journalists, but with business people. You don't want to have intermingling of your technology. So if your phone that you use on the day-to-day, like, just leave it at home, because why risk whatever, especially because the danger might not be while you're there as much as when you come back, because if there's like spyware or something like that that's been loaded on, the payoff for them is kind of after the fact when you come back and it gets on a network or whatever sort of crazy paranoid fantasy you can come up with. I kind of come at this from the perspective of, I don't really care so much about the what ifs as much as I know technically good approaches, sound approaches that can generally withstand anything that can get thrown at them, which is why I think you keep hearing the word encryption over and over again, because that is probably one of the best ways to secure any information to whatever degree that's really possible. But there's nothing perfect.
You guys have given a lot of good ideas. You've pointed out a couple things that people shouldn't do. Is there anything you want to point out, any systems that maybe people have put their faith in to provide security that aren't all they're cracked up to be? Have at it.
I would just say, as a no-brainer, also Gmail, Hotmail, anything that resides in the U.S., don't trust it. There's no reason to. They've given you, again, like you said, you keep things out of email, but being realistic, we all make mistakes. Clouds, unless you have researched and found a encrypted and protected cloud, I wouldn't put, Gmail is, Google's the worst, but a good rule of thumb, as someone said to me, and even when dealing with VPNs like Tor, it's not so much if it's coming in or out of the United States at some point through its onion, there is a concern. And I do know, I am almost positive that the U.S. government has a backdoor on Tor for the parts that come through the U.S. It's just certain things that are good ideas. Always have a dummy phone that's cash only. You can, I use AT&T because they have a little machine. It doesn't cost you. It's like $30 for the phone. If you already have one, you can. If it's unlocked, you just get a SIM card. You can change the card all the time. Although you remember that if you're using the same phone, the phone also has its own identification. That's really important if you're working abroad and switching your chips out. You're still leaving the same imprint. Here in the U.S., debit cards that are you can pay for cash at a 7-Eleven and get essentially a credit card that doesn't have your name on it, allows you to buy things with a card that you can't get with cash, and it leaves no trace for you. Sadly, I think we're in an era where you have to think a little bit like a criminal, or thinking of it from a conspiracy standpoint of just, I urge you not to get too crazy. I did want to point out, though, that in this area on the legal side, because the laws that are on the books are so outdated and mostly written from 85 or 86, what the government has done, at least in criminal cases, is they've essentially hoodwinked the judges. They get warrants for things that they don't describe what they're doing technologically that are clear violations of the Fourth Amendment. And so as you go forward, we were listing before what kind of things you do as a journalist, national security, but I urge you to think of it as being, if you cover the police or the courts and you have a source that gives you something from a grand jury or a sealed case, and the judge decides they've had enough and they're going to open an investigation into who leaked that out, you are fair game. And your source is going to be fair game. And so the technology has advanced so quickly without the laws and without, generally, I would say, and I don't know if your experience is the same, but, people on the Hill really don't have an understanding of how easy it is to be able to do this stuff, and how little of a warrant you need. And so there are, and it was said before, you're working with, against a large corporation that, by the way, has an enormous amount of legal resources to pin against, a source who may have whistleblown or leaked, or in fact your news publication, and they often win, and they win because they have the resources to. So it's not just the cloak and dagger stuff. It's very almost benign. Court reporting is and police reporting is vital, but it's not the most sophisticated of source journalist relationship. So I just thought that was worth pointing out as something to keep in mind about why this becomes imperative.
Yeah, and I promised Quinn Norton that I would mention the administrative subpoena, and this is not a warrant. This is the kind of thing where no judge sees this, but they basically have to make a representation that something is relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation, and they get access to pretty much any business records that they want. Your telephone records, stuff like that, call records, and electrical bills and stuff like that. But in terms of things that aren't doing a good job, I would actually say I don't think you should worry so much about Tor backdoors. As someone who's sort of half a computer scientist and half a lawyer, a lot of the vulnerabilities against Tor are what's called traffic analysis, where someone is looking at your internet connection and this other internet connection and trying to see if that's the same person making the connection. That's not a lot. Tor is trying its best to respond very quickly to that stuff, but it's not really a backdoor. And Hushmail while Hushmail provides encrypted web mail, but there are a few cases in which it has had to decrypt and give email records to judges, and so if that's in your threat model, that's not a good solution. It's good for smaller casual things. There's a lot of really good work going on in here. I know there's people in the room that are building stuff that for journalists and for other kinds of human rights types of stuff. So, for example, there's something called Martus, martus.org, which provides for encrypted submission of form-like data. So you fill out a form on a phone, and then it gets encrypted before it goes up to a database. And that's neat if you end up doing any sort of crowdsourced, like big data kinds of journalism, where you don't want people having their stuff snarfed, sort of, it's very secure. And in fact, it's so secure that what they do is it takes a quorum of key holders that are all over the place to sort of unlock that stuff if anyone needs to recover it or something like that, but it's natively encrypted. And so that I just point to that there's a lot of really new stuff, and I could talk forever, and there's people in the room we could talk to you, we could refer you to that just know this stuff way better than I do, for sure.
There's a couple of things that I think a lot of journalists have started relying upon. One's like instant messaging, GChat, GTalk, whatever, and then also Skype. And some people feel like, it's fine, and then, I hear the word encryption, I see it on Skype's website, but there's a lot of suspicions that have kind of come about as to, how exactly that functions. Skype/Microsoft's been kind of cagey as to, confirming or denying certain potential limitations to the protection there, especially from some sort of backdoor to the government if they're approached about that. So relying on that for communications with sources of a sensitive nature is probably an awful idea. Even if it is okay, you don't know for sure that it's okay, and why take the chance? If a couple months from now they get the all clear from the privacy community, use Skype all you want. But until then, I think it's got a little bit of a cloud over it. So voice over IP, generally speaking, that's something that people like to use, especially like internationally. There's some things you can do to protect that I'm not going to get too into because it's technical. Another thing that I briefly talked about was the instant messaging. On GChat, there's off-the-record mode, which means it doesn't keep chat logs, but that's not like what you think it is if you've ever heard of off-the-record mode in other instant messaging situations. And that off-the-record is actually a pure negotiated encryption sort of situation that actually does provide for a secure path of instant communication between two parties. So they kind of hijacked the moniker because, when you're a journalist, I want to go off the record, that's kind of turn of the phrase. So if you do want to do instant messaging with a sensitive source, you definitely need to educate yourself more on how to do that, and that will require software on both sides, which does make it a little bit more of a thing to set up with a source. One resource that's out there that's good is securityinabox.org, and it's just kind of a grab bag of jumping off points for different elements of privacy, security, encryption, communications, etc. Some NGO bankrolled that, and I think a Dutch NGO. So good stuff there. There's a lot of information out there because some of the most secure tools that we have are open source tools. They're free. They're community developed. One of the reasons why they are secure is because they are open. And transparency is something that I think makes a lot of us feel better about certain processes. So it's
check your file signatures, and if you don't know what that means, talk to me.
This is actually a big thing because there have been attempts to provide security tools to people in like Syria and whatnot, masquerading, and they're really like spyware and whatnot. So I mean, someone somewhere in some security service got this clever idea at a bar, and they actually did it, and it's worked, much to some people's detriment. So making sure a trusted source is where you get these tools is very important, and also educating your source on, you can't just Google and click the first link that comes up for whatever you're telling them to get. Like, you got to make sure they get it from the right place, and you can talk more about how they can verify that if people are curious about that.
Yeah, there are ways to check the fingerprint of a file, but it's a little advanced. But if you have concerns about that, you should look into checking file signatures, and there's a bunch of guides that will show you.
And we can huddle at the end of this if you want more details.
Well, I said I would try to leave the last half hour or so to questions, and so why don't we go ahead and do that? Starting over here, Rachel.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about surveillance by the U.S. government. What if you're a journalist working in the States and you get a suspicious email that looks legitimate? Like a while ago last year, a prominent defense think tank seemed to have sent out an email inviting people to click on a new report that they had written about space satellites, and it turned out to be like a phishing attack originating from China, and it was sent out to a lot of journalists and people who work on defense issues. What do you know about those kinds of things, and what do reporters need to be aware of about being suspicious? Because I guess this was very sophisticated. It wasn't like a Nigeria lottery scam. It looked legit.
Well, one thing I do is I'll forward it to Gmail. And the reason that makes any sense is Gmail often for common file formats has a preview mode that sort of just renders it in regular web style, and so you can see what's inside without having to really sort of drink the Kool-Aid. But it's really hard, especially for things that virus scanners don't know about. If they're using exploits and if they're using methods that virus scanners know about, you should make sure that your email flow is hooked into your virus scanner. But it could be really hard. And one way to do it is make friends with people like me who have friends who do forensics, and we can forward it to them and say, and I wish there was sort of like a McDonald's for is this file safe kind of a thing, but there's not really. But there are really good people out there who can open them in sort of a little jail cell and see if they're trying to poke through or modify stuff or install things that it shouldn't. And so if you suspect that, we should make sure that the right people are looking at it. But often, unfortunately, it's going to be we click on everything, right? But if you do see some weird stuff happening, definitely we should raise the call to arms, so to speak, and figure out what the heck's going on. And then you got a new story, but hopefully you're not screwed in the process.
Well, if it's from like a unsolicited sort of source, some due diligence, you can view the source of the message, and if it directs you to some like really kind of hinky website, like something that looks sort of like it should be correct, but then there's like a dot whatever after the .com, or those are telltale signs. If you want to be really paranoid, you can select the name of the report and then Google it, because if they did publish it, then you should be able to get it that way too, instead of using the link that they gave you. So that's sometimes a good first step as well, is to see if you can pull it up a different way versus using the link that was so conveniently given to you.
Okay. Yes.
Can you speak a bit about this standard tools of communications, not email, for instance, BBMs or DMs on Twitter, or sending a draft on your blog? Secondly, what's the difference? Which one is more vulnerable as compared to a cell phone, from a cell phone to a computer itself?
Man, that's a complicated question. I just think you should just never use your cell phone. I mean, even the burner thing. It's just if it's going to be really important, you should use really hard crypto. You should use PGP, GPG. There are some. So I used to tell people don't ever send text message or in IM. OTR off the record, the real off the record, not the GChat version of off the record, is really good. But there's this step that people often don't do, which is so encryption is sort of hand in hand with authentication. So you can get an encrypted message from someone, but how do you know it's from them? You usually have to do this thing where you call them on the phone and you exchange some quick little code. And it's turtles all the way down, as Stephen Hawking would say. But there are some new tools that get a lot of flack, but are sort of getting better and better. Like Crypto.cat is a web browser-based chat tool that's encrypted and is getting better and better. And there was a lot of hardcore crypto guys who sort of got on their case for not doing as good a job as they should. But that's probably not. I think that it's hard to recommend anything, because if I say something to you that ends up getting someone hurt or in prison, I would feel really bad about it. And that's why I tend to default to the most paranoid thing possible. But things like saving drafts, I just don't know what to say about that. It's good enough for terrorists.
I'll give you an example. There was I just was skimming something and saw a case with this is currently, I think it's out of Nevada. There's a now ex-FBI, senior FBI supervisory agent who was allegedly colluding with a defense contractor, and they set up a series of dummy email accounts where they shared the path. There was three of them, actually, three people, and they shared the passwords. And what they would do, and I'm guilty of something similar to this, is they would send a message that would say, I think they used football, so one would say "Go Bears," and the other one would say "Go Jets," and that meant go look in our drafts folder. Now, what they didn't realize was that the FBI had been following them and surveilling them for months, and had been looking at what was left. I mean, in other words, normally you write something in there, you wait for someone to read it, they erase it, then they either write something back or leave nothing. And the theory being, of course, that because there was nothing sent, there's nothing to follow. But they had their passwords, and they were looking at them as they were doing them, and then they put them in the indictment. So there is no, I think it's, you ask about BBMs and DM, at the end of the day, the truth is that it all should be face-to-face. I know that's not always practical. In this day and age where you could be dealing with people on other sides of the country and or all over and traveling, it's not always practical and it's not always realistic, but in general, face-to-face is really the only way to do it. And the phone actually isn't bad in some regards. I mean, it's sort of, in a sense, ironically, I think the way to think about this is, as we move forward with technology, the way to conceive of how best practices is to move further back in time and to go back to, the Woodward and Bernstein days of parking garages or what have you. But really, the phone, if they're not listening live, they don't know what you said. And so they may know that you called and spoke for 15 minutes, but they don't know actually what you said. And so from the journalist standpoint, if you've assured your source that you would never testify or share anything, and you're willing to be held in contempt, on that side, your source is clean. Now, what the source decides to say or not say when they're pulled is something that you can't control. But again, you're trying to mitigate risks, each way. And I think it, the technology is really important, and I think it's especially important if you travel abroad in any capacity or dealing with people outside of the U.S., where the laws and the privacy restraint is less, depending on the country, obviously. But I think I know for myself, the way to keep myself from getting too paranoid is to just think of it very simply and go the other way, because it sort of ensures that you are not leaving this trail for someone to pick up later.
You mentioned DMs. Anthony Weiner and some of the Occupy Wall Street folks, WikiLeaks folks, didn't end well. Twitter
even though Twitter's fighting.
Yeah, they are fighting, but they can only fight so much, and it's just inherently not a secure way of communicating, unless you're DMing snippets of encrypted code. But
it makes what you can say very, very short. But you can do this. I can teach you how to do this.
And app.net, people have to pay for that, and not many people are on there. So maybe security through obscurity, but those just aren't good pathways for that kind of thing. So you really want to go to a more robust deal if you really care about keeping it secure.
Well, and you brought up a point that I think, with the encrypted, sending ciphertext within a direct message. This is probably only makes sense to a few people in the room and some on the camera, but I'm a big fan lately of the analog whole, which means eventually something has to be spoken to you, or you have to read it with your eyes. And everyone puts little Post-its over their cameras on MacBooks and their because they don't want anyone turning their camera on without them knowing it. But what I want is something that flips down over that and scrambles it so what the camera actually sees is white noise, and there's some other negotiation that happens, and the other person has something that can turn it back into whatever, and then the tools are in your own hand. I don't think this exists. It's sort of like putting something on the phone receiver, and what goes into the thing is white noise. But that would be awesome, and that's the kind of thing where if it's open source and you've verified signatures and blah blah blah, open hardware even, which gets even crazier. That could be so awesome, but that takes a ton of research and a ton of development that I don't think anyone's done.
So a couple of years from now, we'll talk about whatever that is and how it works.
Yes.
I'm excited to hear more about what that was. This has mostly been U.S. based, talking about U.S. situations and rule of law here. My question is how do we reach those 10% of reporters, both in the U.S. and internationally, who perhaps are citizen journalists, bloggers, who need this sort of training and need this sort of access? I've talked to a number of people, Al Jazeera, BBC, elsewhere, that reporters and journalists within those organizations don't get the support from their internal IT. And so they don't really have places they can go to get it. Downloading security in a box is great, but frequently you need hands-on, you need hand-holding, you're slowly building up intuition and a sense of threat modeling and trying out tools and so forth. Where do you guys go? Where do people find this? And how many journalists do you think are actually seeking it out and using it?
That gives me a chance to mention a website that is very interesting and informative, and you all can add whatever you want, but I wanted to mention it because in addition to CPJ's great work, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has a site called Surveillance Self-Defense, which gets into, maybe not quite the detail that these guys would, but it gets pretty deep. So it won't hold your hand, but it'll tell you a lot. Yeah. So you guys can add what you like.
Well, and I would say that there really is a need for, I'm 2 months out of academia, and I taught my students in a privacy class and a communications class about Tor using envelopes within envelopes within envelopes. No code whatsoever, but showing that you could pass an anonymous message, doing that kind of stuff. And I think there's innovation, so to speak, to be done in the educational space. So, new sort of pedagogical ways and new kinds of materials and things that are sort of tested to be usable and understandable by various constituencies, and journalists really need it. And that's probably not a bad place to start. The rule of thumb tends to be if you can explain it to a smart high school student, then you can probably explain it to many, many, many other people. And I think maybe developing materials and testing tools to that kind of a level is really important, and being able to distribute them and being able to say, hey, this exists. Here's where you go to get sort of the intro primer stuff. If you need more advanced stuff, you're going to have to get a little dirtier and go here, here, here. And I don't know if that may exist. I've seen a lot of really good guides for journalists. Yeah, there's lots of guides, but there's I don't know. I didn't see one that was just perfect on this. But maybe this isn't sort of.
Somebody's writing it right.
Let me tell you how I did it, because I had the same. I mean, I don't have an expertise or any kind of technical specialty or skills at all, and I tell you, it really started with this op-ed that I read in the Times, and I was especially it stung almost that it was written by a technologist and not a journalist, because it should have been the other way around. And what I did was I called him up and I said, teach me everything I need to know within an hour and a half. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. The thing that one of the reasons why this is been trying to do as many panels as I can is because when I was at ABC, internally I did a lot to protect my sources, and I did a lot. There was one colleague when I first came in who told me, basically from the standpoint of the news organization as a corporate entity, what I needed to do to firewall all of my stuff from their stuff, so that should a subpoena come, I could honestly not give them anything, and they couldn't hand anything over. And that was a great step. But beyond that, it was appalling how poor the security was, and just as a mentality. And so one of the things that I think is really vital is that people are going back to their newsrooms, and there is no answer. I mean, in the sense that it's being done in piecemeal right now. I mean, I think CPJ. I know Frank is trying to put together a course that I think one of the things, the way to go is to be able to bring these workshops into the different graduate schools and universities that are teaching journalism, so that you get it, part because you're dealing with younger people who have already at a better level in terms of understanding, but you get them young so that it's a normal practice. But it's been, one of the things that Chris Sargoyan was really, he tells this joke. I mean, one of the things in the op-ed was he talks about how he asked about WikiLeaks and when Julian Assange was dealing with Bill Keller, and he asked, so when you talked to him, did you have like a secure method, an encrypted thing? And Bill Keller said no, and he said, surprise, surprise, the 3 graphs where I spanked them and Bill Keller for being so naive and silly as to think that they can be talking with Julian Assange without having some sort of protected form of communications was cut out. But I think it really drove home the point, which is that if Bill Keller of the New York Times is on the phone with Julian Assange or however he was communicating in a way that wasn't secure, it goes top down. And I know of a lot of journalists, a lot of my colleagues. I know a lot of people in this particular field, and we all trade little tips of what to do based on what their sources have told them. But in general, I think it behooves news organizations to be teaching this, because ultimately it's their product that's going to suffer when it goes wrong. So I just start out with individually, do it for yourself, and then you spread the gospel as you go forward.
Are there more journalists asking for it in the news organizations you guys are associated with?
It's kind of ad hoc. You either think about it or you don't, and if you don't, it doesn't make a sound. No, it's just recklessness. And you kind of point to a void that's there. That's not just for small groups of citizen journalists. It's kind of for the whole field, where this is just not something that's really been emphasized to the degree that it needs to be, especially moving forward, with technology and the levels of surveillance that are kind of being maintained regularly. So I would even say that organizations with the resources should throw some funds at this issue, because we don't all have, very unique situations that require different tools. It's pretty much the same. So, best practices are pretty tailored across the waterfront as to these various subject matter areas or news or print versus broadcast versus whatever. So, whether it's the Knight Foundation or someone, but some resources should be brought to bear to raise awareness, improve tools, and raise awareness with workshops or how-to guides or whatever. And being not far removed myself from journalism school, this wasn't in the course guide or discussed anywhere, and it should be.
Yeah. And of course, that's one of the reasons that we're here. The National Press Club
Yeah.
is committed to raising awareness and getting people to do something about this. Frank?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Frank Smythe. I'm with CPJ and also with some of the Global Journal of Security. We're trying to put together a course to start teaching journalists. There is an increasing awareness in the journalist community that we need digital security skills. And the headlines this week make that very clear. But journalists will tell me, you know what, it's too hard, we're never going to learn it, so forget it. And a lot of people are saying that. Now people are starting to question that, because clearly if you want to do national security reporting, if you want to do overseas human rights reporting, if you want to do organized crime, municipal corruption, you're going to have to start thinking about this. But I think we've got a few things. Journalists don't like to learn anything they don't think is absolutely essential, so we've got to sort of break through that nut. And the internet freedom technologist community also, I think, is, to me, and I've written about this and sort of gotten some pushback on it, but I think there's a sense that, well, don't you know how to use PGP? And for those of us that have used it, you can use PGP, but it's not that easy.
No.
You've got to kind of work with it. And I think what we need is an effort to make tools that are easier and more intuitive, right? And CryptoCat is moving in that direction, right? Even though it's had some false starts, but I think it's definitely going in the right place. And I think we also need to get the donors to think there's a lot of money out there to make a new sexy tool that's going to make bells and whistles. But if nobody knows how to use the tools, or only a small group of people know how to use the tools, it doesn't get us where we need to be. And I would imagine that in this room, people who are here, if you came in thinking you're going to go out of this, I don't know if you're already using digital security practices, but I would imagine you're going to be more confused by what you heard today if you're not already sort of up to speed. Because you're like, oh my God, how am I going to figure all this stuff out? And we need something that there's all sorts of presumptions in your heads about verification and things that I'm trying to learn, but I think the technology community doesn't realize that this is like Greek to the rest of us. And I think we've got to sort of make a real effort to bridge that gap. And we're working on it, but so far it's not moving at a pace we'd like to see.
Yeah, and if there are any funders out there, I'm not speaking from, we don't do this at my shop, but we have someone who's at Human Rights Watch who does it, and there's a bunch of people in the room. But if there are any funders out there, it's not just about building tools, it's about delivering good documentation, not documentation just to use the tool, sort of in a geeky way, but documentation that's usable, and conditioning funding or further funding on usability evaluations and stuff like that, which is user testing. I think that's key in being able to report back that not only did we build this thing, but we used elements of user-centered design, which is sort of a term of art, in order to make sure that this thing was usable by groups. And if we can make these things more usable for journalists, they're going to be more usable for everyone. I think it's all win there. But yeah, I'm sorry for making presumptions, but I'm an educator. No, I'm an educator, so I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything that we said that was confusing.
Well, it's like verification, right? We all know what that means, but what you actually mean by that is a mystery to most of us.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a few questions, and we're running down to a few minutes, so let's try to keep them, succinct from the questions and the answers. Start here.
I feel that frequently in discussions of digital security, there is a sort of glossing over of the actual human element of just sheer human intelligence when dealing with these issues. I spent several years living in a repressive, high surveillance environment, and there are sort of just basic things that you end up taking for granted, which is why a lot of journalists say it's just not worth it, because you just assume no matter what you do, it's going to be found out anyway, because there's people watching you, right? It's not just people tapping you, it's people actually watching you or following you. But, there's also, if you leave your cell phone in a hotel room, like to go to dinner, right? Done. Game over. I mean, that's all there is to it. Micro SD cards are much more useful than flash drives. Taking the last flight in and taking the last flight out, you're a lot less likely to be exposed to border control because they want to go home, right? Like, there's no country where customs officials get paid a lot of money, right? They all want to go home, and so it has to be you have to be a really high target to get somebody to stay late. And if you're a foreign citizen and you're being detained and you've missed your flight, then suddenly it's an overnight detention, an embassy has to be called, foreign ministry has to be brought in. It's a huge hassle, right? So you have to be someone that they've already kind of decided to go for and really sort of hit this, I don't know, level of annoyance with, right? Level of bureaucratic annoyance. And so I guess I would just say, in these discussions and in thinking about this, beyond the tech, I think it's worthwhile considering just the sheer, you know, very, very basic steps, kind of what you were saying about going backwards. Ladies, not to be too sort of, you know, blunt or anything, but underwire bras are your friend. You can hide a lot of micro SD cards in an underwire bra, and it's you know, they're Spanx for men now. I don't know, but
Underwire Spanx. Wow.
You know, a belt, for example, is another really, you know, can be a good place to stash in a micro SD card where it's not really going to be seen. And if you're in a place where they just wand you, you can hide really tiny things like a micro SD in there, and it's not going to be exposed the same way that like your laptop would be, right? So there's just little basic common sense approaches, I think, as well, tactics that I sometimes just fear are glossed over in the sort of fancier, sexier world of encryption and two-step verification and Tor, and so.
Okay. Anybody have a reaction to that?
Say we should aggregate this. There should be a place to collect this stuff, you know, and maybe there is, and I hear some breathing over there, but I don't know where it is.
Okay. Young lady back there, did you have something?
Oh yeah, so there is a lot of money being poured into this field right now, and I do happen to work for NDI. There's also a lot of threats right now. So there's two things that are happening. On the one hand, there's a ton of money to the tune of $30 to $50 million at minimum being poured into internet freedom and security tools, from circumvention to encryption, you name it. So there's a lot of new stuff that's coming online, and yeah, some of it is going to be duds, and some of it's, you know, sexy, shiny at the expense of the common sense. But there's no shortage of stuff for you to find out, and you're journalists, right? So I would urge you to actually use your, you know, innumerable skills for investigation to actually find us, find what's going on, you know, test with us, try it out. I wouldn't necessarily poo-poo the technologists, who, yeah, they can get a little wacky and paranoid and all, but, you know, come, let's have a conversation. I think the crypto parties are a really good example of that, to kind of make this stuff more accessible, more usable, and use Skillshares. I think we haven't been creative enough, but, you know, let's not malign each other. Let's work on this together. So that's one point. And then the other point is there's a much greater number of threats that are coming at us faster and faster. I happen to work for an organization, and, you know, you mentioned the phishing attacks earlier, this other person, you know, right now, at this very moment in time, you can be assured that every organization that works on human rights, that works on net freedom, that works on China, that works on, you know, whatever, defense industry in this town is under attack with phishing, emails, with malware attacks. We have people from Google in our office, you know, every other month to help us figure out malware attacks. You know, we work with academic institutions to, you know, send them our stuff. You know, we're sort of constantly on the alert, locking down. You know, I think news organizations need to do the same thing, and if they're not, they are reckless and they are irresponsible. You know, if not, NGOs can do it. I think certainly, you know, ABC News and others can do it. So again, I would put a little more onus on you and do a little, you know, less moaning and more pushing inside as well as reaching out.
Okay. Anybody want to react to that, or leave it at that? Okay. Well, this is certainly, you know, we certainly, in some ways we scratched the surface, in some ways we dove real deep on some things. The main reason we wanted to have this event was primarily to raise consciousness about the situation, because, you know, this is something that it's not just important for journalists, as I said at the outset, it's important for democracy. And you can take the high-tech road, or you can go to the parking garage, or you can do something in between, but do something, and let's be aware of it. And I want to thank our panel, and I want to thank you all for being here very much.